Welcome back. In recent days, social media has turned purple as thousands across South Africa and beyond rally behind the Women for Change movement. This call for action, dubbed the Purple Movement, has gone viral as the organization prepares for a national shutdown on November 21st, just ahead of the G20 Summit. Now, the protests aim to draw urgent attention to South Africa's ongoing crisis of gender-based violence and femicide under the striking message, "We bury a woman every 25 hours." The movement is calling on women to withdraw their labor, refrain from spending, and stand still for 15 minutes at noon to symbolize the women whose lives are lost daily. Joining us now is Katerina Katopodis, Editor-in-Chief at Kaya 959, formerly known as Kaya FM in South Africa, to help us understand the vision behind this, the symbolism of this purple wave, and the role that the media plays in covering this shutdown. Katie, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Good evening, Nina. A lovely, warm evening, I believe, in your part of the world, and rainy and overcast here in Johannesburg.
We really appreciate the time you've taken out to speak to us tonight on this really important movement that we're seeing just gaining such strong momentum. But let's start with the motivation behind this movement, Katie. From what you know, what was the key moment or, the turning point that led Women for Change to call for a national shutdown just ahead of this G20 summit?
Yes. Well, Nina, I'm not sure what that key turning point for Women for Change was, but what I can tell you is that gender-based violence in South Africa is a scourge. There isn't a day that goes by that I, in my newsroom as an editor and a journalist, we don't cover such stories. And so we really have a very, very serious issue with gender-based violence in our country, regrettably. And so I imagine that they're just wanting to really highlight this. And importantly, a day before the G20 leaders descend on the country.
The movement also quickly became known as the Purple Movement, Katie. Could you explain the significance of this purple color and what it symbolizes?
Well, I love to think it's about the jacaranda trees, which are blossoming and just looking gorgeous across the country, across Joburg. But I think it's got more to do with the actual color that is the Gender for Change and this movement. I think this is their color. It symbolizes who they are. And of course, social media users, South Africans have been urged to change their profile pictures to purple. And we've seen a flood of purple flood our timelines. So it really seems to be taking effect, and we're seeing a lot of that purple.
As you've rightfully mentioned earlier, South Africa has been battling this crisis of gender-based violence for years. Why do you think it's reached this point where activists feel that a national shutdown is the only way to be heard?
Because I think we finally need to call on authorities to take gender-based violence really seriously. Far too often are we reporting on cases of femicide, domestic violence, and abuse that leads to death. Far too many women in our country are subjected to serious abuse. And we're hearing statistics like a woman is buried every 2.5 hours in South Africa. And these are chilling numbers. And I think as all women, all South Africans, we need to sit up and take note. And I'm hoping that the authorities will sit up and take note and say, finally, something needs to be done.
How has the South African media responded to this national shutdown call, Katie? Are newsrooms giving it the coverage, that it deserves?
Well, they certainly are covering it. I did a scan of newspapers and online and television, and I definitely see that it has been covered. Perhaps not as widely as it will be on the day or perhaps, on the eve of the 21st. I'm expecting that the coverage will spruce up the closer we get to the 21st. But it certainly has made mainstream media and national
100%. And thanks to social media, it's really amplified this movement. It's how I got wind of it. But from a journalistic standpoint, how do you verify and contextualize viral campaigns like this for your audience?
So it's really important. We know that in this age of fake news and misinformation and disinformation, we can't simply take it on social media and republish it, and in our case at Kaya 959 rebroadcast it. So it really does need to be verified. I know that our team, we have a policy of verifying things very carefully before we go on air with them. And so in an instance like we saw the chatter, we saw the purple, and we started having conversations in our editorial meetings. So what is this about? We reached out to the organization, got hold of the organizers and verified that actually it is very much a legitimate issue and a legitimate way of saying, let's make our voices as women heard.
Well, just lastly, Katie, I'd like to know, in your experience, how does media coverage of domestic activism shift when there's a global audience potentially watching?
I think it's critical. And a lot has been said about the state of media the world over, but I really believe that media has such a huge important role to play. And so it's very important that we're able to give this the coverage that it needs, particularly as the G20 leaders, most of them we know, except for Donald Trump, descend on South Africa. And when we've got a global already has their eyes turned on South Africa, it does become important to start raising critical issues. I know that as SANEF, the South African National Editors Forum, we recently held what we called an M20 Summit on the outskirts of the G20, calling on global leaders to prioritize things like journalism and wellness and looking at trolls attacking journalists, particularly female journalists on social media.
Well, we're definitely going to be keeping our eyes glued to see what unfolds on November 21st, and most importantly, what solutions transpires from this shutdown. Katie, thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Roundup. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Nina. Thanks very much.
That was Katerina Katopodis from Kaya 959, the editor-in-chief, speaking to us about the purple movement that we've seen gaining momentum across social media over the past couple of days. Thousands of women around the world and around South Africa are rallying behind the Women for Change movement to finally address what they describe as an epidemic in South Africa, the scourge of gender-based violence, as well as femicide happening in the